A stranger asked to dance with a disabled girl and promised he could make her walk again. What happened next left her millionaire father speechless. The small dance studio was filled with the gentle hum of music and the soft shuffling of feet on polished wooden floors. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, making dust particles float like tiny stars in the air. Children laughed and moved in patterns they had practiced hundreds of times, their faces glowing with excitement and concentration. But in one quiet corner of the room, sitting slightly apart from the rest, was a young girl in a wheelchair. She was small, maybe no older than 8 or 9, with dark, curious eyes that seemed to observe everything but rarely smiled. Her hands rested lightly on her lap. Her gaze followed the other children as they twirled, leaped, and spun around the room. It was clear she had once loved to dance, or at least dreamed about it. But now she could only watch. Her father, a tall man in an expensive suit, stood near the back of the room. His phone in hand, he occasionally glanced at the girl but seemed more absorbed in messages and emails than in her world. He was a millionaire, a man used to controlling business deals, markets, and people. But there was a tension about him that only a father could carry, a mix of worry, frustration, and helplessness. He had spent years trying everything doctors suggested, therapies, treatments, even experimental programs, and yet here she sat, still confined to the wheelchair that had become both her companion and her cage. The studio door opened quietly, and a young man stepped in. He was not dressed like a doctor or a therapist. He wore simple clothes, a t-shirt and jeans, with sneakers slightly scuffed from use. There was something in the way he moved, a calm confidence, a gentle energy that seemed to reach out and touch the space around him. He scanned the room quickly, and then his eyes landed on the girl. He walked toward her slowly, almost as if approaching someone delicate, someone fragile. But with a certainty that was impossible to ignore, he crouched down so he was at her level. And for a moment the room seemed to pause. The music continued. The other children continued their dance, but it was as if the air around them held its breath. He smiled at her and said softly, "Hello, I want to dance with you. I'll make you walk again." The words hung in the air like a spark. The father's hand froze over his phone. He blinked, unsure he had heard correctly. Did he just... what? He muttered under his breath, almost hoping he had imagined it. The young man, however, did not wait for a response. His eyes held a kind of honesty that made it difficult to dismiss him. "I know it sounds impossible," he said, "but sometimes movement, rhythm, and a little belief can do things no machine or medicine can." The father's skepticism was natural. He had seen many promises come and go. Doctors with fancy degrees make claims they could never fulfill, expensive therapies that yielded nothing. But there was something different about this young man, something in the way he stood. The quiet confidence in his voice, the way he looked at his daughter, not as someone limited or broken, but as someone capable of more. The young girl at first seemed hesitant. She had learned long ago that hope often led to disappointment. Her fingers twitched on the armrests of the wheelchair as she studied him, unsure whether to trust a stranger with words that sounded like magic. But there was also a tiny spark of curiosity in her eyes. She had dreamed, late at night when no one was watching, of standing, of running, of twirling across the floor. That spark, buried under layers of doubt and fear, flickered now. "Just one try," the young man said gently. "If you don't like it, you don't have to continue. No pressure." His words were not just instructions, they were an invitation, a bridge between a world of limitations and a world of possibility. The father hesitated, then nodded slowly. Something about the calm certainty of this man made him want to believe. If only a little. The young man positioned himself carefully beside the girl. He adjusted the wheelchair slightly, making sure she was comfortable. Then, with a smile that radiated patience and hope, he extended his hand. "May I?" he asked. The girl's hand hovered over his for a moment, trembling slightly, and then she placed it in his. The room seemed to brighten, though the sun had not moved. There was an invisible thread connecting them now, promise of movement, of change, of possibility. For a few seconds, nothing else mattered. The music, the other children, the millionaire father, they all became background noise. It was just the girl and the young man, and the quiet understanding that something new was about to begin. Her small fingers gripped his hand, and she felt warmth, safety, and something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The father watched, still holding his phone, but no longer looking at it. His heart raced, a mixture of fear and anticipation. Could this really be real? Could this stranger, this young man with no medical degree, no guarantees, actually help his daughter take steps again? He wanted to say something, to voice his doubt, but the words stuck in his throat. All he could do was watch and hope that this spark might ignite something greater. As the music continued, the young man whispered, "Let's start small. Just move with me. Feel the rhythm. Trust your body." And then, with gentle guidance, he began to sway slightly, moving his hand in ways that encouraged her to follow. At first, it was just a shift of weight, a lean forward, a tiny movement that barely counted as standing. But the girl's face changed. Her eyes widened, a smile tugged at her lips. And for the first time in years, she felt capable. Not confined. It was a simple beginning, almost invisible to anyone else in the room. But to the girl and her father, it was monumental. This small moment, the stranger's quiet confidence, the girl's tentative movement, the father's stunned gaze, was the start of something extraordinary. And though no one could know it yet, this single encounter in a small dance studio would set in motion a journey that would transform their lives forever. After that first tentative moment in the studio, a quiet energy settled over the girl and the young man. The other children carried on with their dances. The instructors called out corrections, and the soft strains of music continued to fill the room. But for these two, it felt as if time had slowed. The young man, with a calm and gentle voice, began to explain what he wanted to do. He wasn't a doctor, and he didn't claim to have magical powers. But he spoke of something far more important: the power of movement, rhythm, and belief in one's own body. He told the father that dance was not just an art form. It was a way to reconnect the mind with muscles that had been unused or forgotten. Every small motion, every beat of the music, could help the girl's body remember what it once knew. He spoke with quiet passion, describing stories of other children who had regained strength and mobility simply by learning to trust their bodies again. His words weren't rehearsed or overly dramatic. They were heartfelt, grounded in experience and patience. The father, still skeptical, leaned against the wall, arms crossed, listening. There was a part of him that wanted to dismiss this as foolishness. Yet another part, the part that had loved his daughter from the very start, couldn't ignore the possibility that something real could happen. The young man crouched beside the girl again, his tone softening. "We will start slowly," he said. "No rush, no pressure. Just small steps. You might wobble, and that's okay. We will celebrate every little movement, no matter how tiny it seems." He reached for her hand once more, and this time she didn't hesitate. There was a strange comfort in his touch, a feeling that he truly saw her, not the wheelchair, not the limits the world had placed on her, but the child who longed to move. He began by asking her to follow the rhythm of the music with small, guided movements. She rocked slightly forward, then back, her hands gripping his as he gently guided her. The father's heart tightened as he watched. He had spent countless hours in clinics, seeing therapists push his daughter to do exercises that left her exhausted and frustrated. And he knew the disappointment in her eyes all too well. But here, in this little studio, with the music wrapping around them, there was no frustration, only curiosity, wonder, and a spark of excitement he hadn't seen in years. The young man explained that dance could do more than strengthen muscles. It could teach confidence. It could heal emotional wounds. It could remind someone that they were capable of more than they imagined. And as he spoke, he didn't just talk at her, he demonstrated. He moved with her, guiding her hands, her shoulders, her torso. Every sway, every lean was carefully designed to engage muscles that had grown weak from disuse. And the girl, despite her initial hesitation, began to respond. She leaned a little further, her eyes widening in surprise at what her body could do, at what she thought she had lost. The father watched, torn between disbelief and awe. He had never seen anyone approach his daughter with such patience and understanding. The young man didn't rush her, didn't demand results. He simply held a Vijana belief that she could move, and in that belief, he carried the promise of possibility. Slowly, the father began to see the tiny changes too, the subtle tightening of muscles in her legs, the way her fingers gripped his hand with increasing confidence, the hint of a smile that threatened to break across her face. "You're doing amazing," the young man said softly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Feel your body. Listen to the music. Trust yourself." The girl nodded almost shyly, but there was determination there now. A tiny spark had been lit, and she was beginning to follow it. Each small movement became an adventure, each guided sway a tiny victory. And the father, who had been so used to disappointment, felt an unfamiliar emotion rising in him. Hope, he realized slowly. That this wasn't about magic or promises that couldn't be kept. This was about someone willing to see potential where everyone else had seen limitation. The young man had no guarantee that his methods would work, yet he believed fully and completely that change was possible. And that belief, that energy was contagious. The girl began to relax, leaning into his guidance, trusting that it was safe to try, to wobble, to feel the rhythm of her body again. For the first time in years, the father allowed himself to imagine a future that wasn't confined to wheelchairs and therapy rooms. He imagined his daughter standing, moving, dancing, even running if she wanted to. He realized how much he had underestimated the power of patience, encouragement, and belief. No doctor, no amount of money, advanced technology could replicate what was happening right here in this simple studio. Between a girl and a man who chose to believe in her. As the session continued, the young man began introducing slightly more challenging movements, always at her pace. He encouraged her to shift her weight, to let her body respond to the music, to experiment with small steps that stretched her limits just enough to be exciting, but not so much as to be discouraging. The girl, who had been hesitant at first, now began to giggle as she rocked forward, almost daring herself to move further. The father watched, stunned at the transformation in her expression. She was no longer a passive observer. She was engaged, curious, alive. By the end of the session, though she had not yet walked on her own, something remarkable had happened. The girl had felt motion, balance, and strength return, even if only for moments. She had felt the joy of movement and the thrill of possibility. The father, still unsure how much of it was real, could see the hope reflected in her Isa, hope that had been missing for far too long as they prepared to leave. The young man knelt down and whispered to the girl, "Tomorrow we'll do more, and each day you'll get stronger. Believe in yourself and trust me." The girl nodded, a shy but genuine smile spreading across her face. The father, now fully captivated by what he had witnessed, followed silently behind them, feeling an unfamiliar sense of gratitude. He didn't yet know how far this journey would go, or if the young man could truly help his daughter walk again, but for the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope. That single afternoon in the dance studio became the beginning of a journey that neither the father nor the girl would ever forget. It was more than just a session. It was a turning point. The young man's promise, his patience, and his belief in the impossible had lit a spark that could not be ignored. And as they stepped out into the sunlight together, the father realized that sometimes hope could arrive in the most unexpected form. A stranger willing to dance with a girl who had forgotten how to dream. The day of the first real dance session arrived, and the small studio seemed alive with quiet anticipation. The sunlight poured through the tall windows, catching in the dust and making the room feel warm, soft, and full of possibility. The other children were already practicing, their laughter and movement blending with the soft music that played in the background. But for the girl in the wheelchair, this day felt different. There was a tension in her chest, a flutter of nervous excitement. She had learned to be cautious, to brace herself for disappointment, but somewhere deep inside, a tiny spark of hope whispered that maybe, just maybe today could be different. Her father, the millionaire, arrived a few minutes later. He had spent hours thinking about the young man's words, replaying them in his mind. Dance can make her walk? He asked himself repeatedly, skeptical yet unable to completely dismiss the possibility. He wasn't just watching to see if the girl could move. He was watching to see if something miraculous could really happen, right here in front of him. As he stepped into the studio, his expensive shoes clicking softly on the wooden floor, he felt a mix of anxiety and hope. The young man greeted them both warmly. He knelt beside the girl's wheelchair, just as he had before, and offered his hand with a gentle smile. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. She hesitated for only a moment before placing her small hand in his. There was a trust forming between them, delicate but real, like the first thread of a spider's web catching the sunlight. He guided her to follow the music's rhythm, explaining in his calm voice that movement didn't have to be perfect. It only had to be felt. The first few moments were tentative. The girl leaned forward slightly, her hands gripping the young man's as he guided her. At first it was subtle, tiny shifts of weight, small adjustments of balance, but with every motion, she began to feel something she hadn't felt in years, the connection between her body and her mind. Her legs, long unused to standing, trembled slightly, but they responded, however faintly, to the rhythm. The father watched from the sidelines, heart pounding, completely absorbed. He could see the determination flicker in her eyes, the cautious curiosity that had once seemed buried beneath layers of fear. "Good. You're doing amazing," the young man encouraged, his voice soft but filled with excitement. "Feel the music. Let your body respond." He moved gently with her, supporting her weight, guiding her hands, shoulders, and legs. There was no rush, no pressure, just the slow, deliberate joy of movement. For the girl, it was as if her body was waking up after a long sleep. Every sway, every tiny motion was a triumph, a reminder that she was not helpless, that she could still experience joy and freedom. Her father could hardly believe what he was seeing. He had spent so many years in clinics and hospitals, watching therapies that left his daughter frustrated and exhausted. But this was different. This was not a rigid exercise or a clinical routine. It was life flowing through her, awakening muscles and confidence in a way no medical equipment or procedure had ever done. He could see it in her expression. Her eyes were bright, her lips curved into a tentative smile, her body responding to the music with increasing ease. The young man continued to guide her, introducing slightly more challenging movements, always at her pace. He encouraged her to lean further, to feel the balance shift, to experiment with what her body could do. She wobbled at first, fear gripping her, but his steady presence reassured her. "You can do it," he whispered. "I'm right here. Trust yourself." And with that gentle encouragement, she began to lean a little more confidently, rocking back and forth in time with the music. Feeling the muscles in her legs and core engage, it was a small victory, almost invisible to anyone else in the room, but monumental to her. Each movement was a proof of possibility, a tiny crack in the wall that had held her in place for so long. She laughed softly as she found her balance, a sound that filled the studio with a warmth that could not be measured. Her father's eyes welled with tears. He had never heard that laughter directed at herself, at her own ability, rather than frustration at limits imposed by her condition. The young man's method was simple but profound. He didn't push. He didn't demand perfection. He simply guided, encouraged, and celebrated each small step, showing her body what it was capable of. With every motion, he reinforced the connection between her mind and her muscles, helping her regain strength and confidence in ways that therapy alone never had. The girl began to understand, in the purest sense, that her body could respond, that she was not broken, that hope was not a lie. For the father, this was a revelation. He realized that all the money in the world, all the doctors, all the treatments, could never replace the human connection, the patience, and the belief that the young man offered. He began to understand that miracles often didn't come from technology or science alone, but from someone willing to see potential where others saw limits. And as he watched his daughter sway, laugh, and trust in her own ability, he felt a profound sense of gratitude and awe. Minutes passed, then hours. The session continued, each movement building on the last. The girl's confidence grew, her balance improved, and the father could see the transformation unfolding in real time. She was no longer just a girl watching from the sidelines. She was participating, experimenting, discovering the joy of movement she had thought lost forever. The small studio became a world of possibility, a place where limitation was replaced by potential, fear by curiosity, and despair by hope. At one point, the young man helped her take a tiny step with his support. It was not much, but it was monumental. Her face lit up with astonishment and delight. She had moved her legs under her own strength, however briefly, and the joy radiating from her was contagious. The father, unable to contain his emotions, stepped closer and whispered words of encouragement. There were tears in his eyes as he saw his daughter experiencing movement in a way he had never seen before. As the music wound down, the young man guided her back to the wheelchair for a rest. He knelt beside her and said softly, "Today was just the beginning. Each day, you will grow stronger. You will learn to trust your body, and step by step, you'll reclaim what you thought you lost." The girl nodded, exhausted but exhilarated, her eyes shining with newfound determination. Her father followed closely, his heart full of awe, hope, and gratitude. That first real dance session was more than just a moment in a studio. It was the beginning of a transformation, a bridge between doubt and possibility, between limitation and freedom. The young man's belief in her ability, the gentle rhythm of the music, and the courage to try had combined to create something extraordinary. For the girl, it was the first taste of independence, the first spark of confidence. For the father, it was the start of a journey that would challenge everything he had thought he knew about healing, love, and hope. As they left the studio that day, the sun casting warm light over the city, the father knew one thing clearly: this was only the beginning. The journey ahead would be long and uncertain, but the first step, his daughter's first dance toward possibility, had already been taken. And in that step, in that small, remarkable movement, lay the promise of a future filled with hope, joy, and the extraordinary power of belief. The weeks that followed the first dance session became a rhythm of hope and quiet determination. Every morning the girl woke with a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. The wheelchair that had once defined her world now seemed less like a barrier and more like a tool she was slowly learning to outgrow. She would look toward the door each day, waiting for the young man who had promised that movement and rhythm could help her walk again. Each session became more than just a practice. It became an adventure, a journey into her own strength and courage. The young man arrived with the same calm confidence he had shown from the beginning. His presence was a steady anchor, a reassuring reminder that she was not alone in this process. Each session, he guided her with patience, encouraging her to push just a little beyond her comfort zone. Sometimes it was a sway, sometimes a shift of weight, sometimes a tiny step, always in harmony with the music that seemed to fill the room with possibility. Slowly but surely, her body responded. Muscles that had grown weak began to remember their purpose. Her balance improved. Her movements became less hesitant, more intentional. The father watched from the sidelines, his initial skepticism giving way to wonder and awe. He had come to understand that this was more than therapy. It was a transformation. With each session, he could see the change not only in her body, but in her spirit. The laughter that once had been rare now echoed through the studio. The sparkle in her eyes grew brighter. Even the simplest movements, like leaning forward or rocking in time with the music, became milestones worthy of celebration. The father found himself cheering silently, unable to contain his pride and relief. He had spent years searching for something to restore her independence, and now he realized that it had been here all along in the form of belief, patience, and the magic of movement guided by someone who cared. One afternoon, the young man introduced a new exercise, slightly more challenging than the previous ones. "Let's try standing with support," he said, his voice gentle yet filled with encouragement. He positioned himself carefully beside her, holding her hands to help her balance. At first, she wobbled, fear flashing in her eyes. But the young man's calm voice reminded her to breathe, to trust her body, to trust herself. Step by step, she leaned forward, letting her legs carry weight she had not felt in years. Her muscles trembled, and a small gasp escaped her lips. The father's heart pounded as he watched, caught between awe and disbelief. She was doing it. She was standing, however briefly, their own strength in his guidance. The young man never let success make them complacent. Each small victory was met with encouragement to continue, to build, to explore the limits of her strength. Every time you try, your body learns, he would say. Every small step counts. We celebrate them all. And so, they celebrated. A tiny lean forward, a half step, a rocking motion, all were triumphs. The girl began to look forward to these moments, feeling the thrill of possibility growing inside her. She laughed when she lost balance, knowing that each wobble was progress. It's not failure. Her father, who had once been distant and overly focused on work, began to engage in ways he hadn't before. He started to ask questions, to watch more closely, to cheer softly. He saw not just the physical changes, but the emotional ones, her growing confidence, her willingness to try, her joy in discovering that her body could do more than she had imagined. It was a transformation that went beyond muscles and balance. It was a shift in her entire outlook, a reclaiming of independence and self-belief that had been dormant for far too long as the weeks passed. The young man introduced more complex movements, always in rhythm with the music that had become their guide. Twists, sways, and assisted steps gradually replaced hesitation with determination. The girl's laughter became a common sound in the studio, her eyes shining with pride at every small achievement. Even the father could not resist joining in occasionally, holding her hands as she practiced tiny steps, marveling at the courage and strength she displayed. Outside the studio, life seemed brighter for them all. The father noticed changes in her demeanor beyond the sessions. She began to participate more in family activities, to interact with friends with more confidence, to explore the world with curiosity instead of fear. It was clear that the lessons in the studio, patience, trust, movement, and belief, were rippling outward, touching every aspect of her life. The young man had given her more than physical strength. He had given her the courage to hope again. One day the young man asked the father to watch more closely. "She's ready for a longer stretch today," he said, a hint of excitement in his voice. The father watched as his daughter, guided gently by the young man, managed to stand for several seconds without support. Her eyes sparkled with pride, and she laughed with exhilaration. The father felt a lump in his throat. The impossible was becoming real before his eyes. He realized that this transformation was the result of more than just physical guidance. It was the result of belief, patience, trust, and encouragement. The young man reminded them both that progress could be slow, and that setbacks were natural. "We will have good days and hard days," he said. "The key is to keep moving, keep believing," and so they did. Each day became a small adventure, a journey of discovery, of reclaiming strength, balance, and hope. Every session built upon the last, creating momentum in each success, no matter how small, reinforced the belief that walking again was not just a dream, but a real possibility. The father began to reflect on the young man's dedication and approach. He realized that all the money, all the advanced therapies, all the medical consultations in the world could not have given his daughter what she was receiving: individualized attention, belief in her potential, and the joyful challenge of learning to trust her own body. This young man had become more than a teacher or guide. He had become a beacon of hope, a reminder that miracles often come in the form of patient effort, encouragement, and unwavering belief. By the end of this phase of their journey, the girl had transformed in ways that went far beyond physical ability. She had gained confidence, joy, and the thrill of possibility. She had learned that she could try, fail, and try again without fear, and that each small step mattered. The father, who had once felt powerless and overwhelmed, now felt hope, a quiet, steady hope that his daughter could reclaim the life that had seemed out of reach for so long. The young man had opened a door, and together, they were beginning to walk through it, one small, extraordinary step at a time. Months had passed since the first dance session, and the little studio had become a world of its own for the girl. What had started as tentative movements had now transformed into a daily ritual of hope, determination, and small victories. The girl, once confined by fear and the limitations of her wheelchair, had begun to discover the extraordinary strength within herself. Each session with the young man had not only improved her physical ability, but also built her confidence, courage, and joy. She had learned that her body could respond in ways she had long believed impossible. That day, the air in the studio felt charged with something electric, almost magical. The sunlight streaming through the windows highlighted every movement, every shadow, every tiny spark of progress she had made. The young man smiled at her warmly, his calm energy steady and encouraging as always. "Today is special," he said softly. "I want you to try something different. You ready?" The girl's eyes widened with a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. She trusted him, but there was still a flicker of doubt. Could she really take this next step? Could she truly stand unaided for the first time? The father, who had watched each session with a mixture of skepticism, hope, and awe, stood quietly in the corner. He had witnessed the progress, yes, but he also knew that real independence was still a challenge. Today, he felt a tension he hadn't experienced before. Could this really be the moment? Could this young man, with his gentle guidance and unwavering belief, help his daughter walk completely on her own? His heart raced as he watched the young man crouch beside her, hands ready to guide, ready to catch if needed, ready to support the next extraordinary step in this journey. The music began softly, a melody that had accompanied them through every session. The girl took a deep breath, feeling the rhythm, feeling her body awake and alive. She placed her hands in the young man's as she had done countless times before, and he gently helped her to shift her weight onto her legs. At first it was unsteady. Her legs trembled, muscles tightening and wobbling under the unfamiliar demand. But he whispered encouragement softly. "You've done this before. Feel it. Trust yourself." Each word was like a lifeline, a reminder that she was not alone. And then it happened. Slowly, cautiously, she took a step forward. One foot in front of the other, guided by his hands but propelled by her own strength. Her eyes widened in astonishment, her lips parting in a small gasp of disbelief. The father, frozen in the moment, could hardly breathe. He watched his daughter, once confined and timid, taking steps he had dreamed of but never thought possible. Each movement was a triumph, each sway a victory over years of limitation and doubt. The young man continued to guide her, steadying her when she faltered, praising her when she succeeded. Step by step, she moved across the studio floor, her confidence growing with each passing second. The rhythm of the music seemed to carry her, each beat echoing in her chest and legs, reinforcing the connection between mind and body that had been nurtured over months of dedication. The father felt tears welling up in his eyes as he watched. The impossible, the miracle he had longed for, was unfolding before him. For the girl, the experience was overwhelming and exhilarating. She laughed a sound of pure joy and triumph as she realized that she could move, that she could stand, that she could walk. The wheelchair, once an inseparable part of her life, had become less central, a tool she no longer needed for this moment. The young man's encouragement, the countless hours of patient guidance, and her own determination had combined to create this moment of triumph. She had proven to herself that she was stronger than she had ever believed. The father, watching stunned, felt a flood of emotions, pride, relief, gratitude, and a deep, almost indescribable joy. He had spent years feeling helpless, frustrated at the limitations imposed on his daughter, worried that she would never experience independence. Now seeing her take those steps, hearing her laughter, watching the sparkle in her eyes, he realized that hope, patience, and unwavering belief could indeed change everything. The young man, kneeling beside her, smiled quietly, proud but humble, knowing that the girl's courage had made this possible as much as his guidance had. The session continued, with the girl taking more confident steps, learning to balance without relying heavily on his hands. Each movement was a victory, each pause a moment of reflection and pride. The music swelled, echoing in the room as if celebrating her triumph alongside them. The father could hardly hold back his emotions. He stepped forward, taking her hand, and together they walked a few steps, his heart swelling with pride and love. This was more than just physical movement. It was freedom, independence, and the reclaiming of a life once thought impossible. When the music ended, the young man guided her back to a resting spot. She was exhausted but exhilarated, a bright, triumphant smile on her face. The father knelt beside her, taking both her hands in his, tears streaming down his cheeks. I can't believe it," he whispered. "You're walking." "Really walking?" She laughed softly, a sound of joy and pride, looking at him and saying simply, "I did it." The father realized that this simple statement held more meaning than any words he could speak. It represented hope restored, dreams fulfilled, and a journey completed not just of walking, but of reclaiming life and confidence. The young man, quietly observing their reunion, reminded them both of the journey ahead. "This is just the beginning," he said softly. "Each step builds strength, confidence, and independence. Keep moving, keep practicing, and remember how far you've come." But for that moment, the father and daughter could simply revel in the miracle of what had happened. The months of effort, patience, guidance, and belief had culminated in this extraordinary, life-changing moment as they left the studio that day. Sunlight streaming over the city, the father held his daughter close, his heart full of gratitude and wonder. He realized that miracles often come not from money or advanced treatments, but from belief, patience, and the courage to try. The young man had shown them that with encouragement, guidance, and trust, the impossible could become possible. And in that moment, the father knew that his daughter's future had been forever changed, not just by the steps she had taken, but by the hope, confidence, and strength she had discovered within herself. That day marked more than just the first time she walked unassisted. It marked a turning point in their lives. A moment when possibility overcame limitation, and when love, guidance, and perseverance combined to create a miracle. The young man's simple words, "Let me dance with your daughter. I'll make her walk again," had become reality. And as they walked into the sunlight, the father knew that this journey had not just restored her movement, it had restored their hope, their belief in miracles, and their faith in the extraordinary power of human courage and connection.